it kind of became fuel for me because there was definitely the imposter syndrome, as the feeling like you're kind of in a cage trying to figure, okay, how do you get out of this? And at that moment, it wasn't just a business; it was kind of my identity. Up until then, I was the founder of a growing company that was about to go public, and then overnight, I wasn't. And then she looked at me and said, like, listen, like this is, I understand the situation, but the reality is we came from nothing. We built a family together. We built a life together. Like, if we have to start over again, we'll be just fine. The second moment of clarity you have is when you either exit or you shut down the business. Everywhere in between is a roller coaster ride where you have uncertainty, you have friction, you have trying to figure things out. You don't know, what you don't know.
Pita's parents came to Canada with nothing. They bought a Baskin Robbins franchise and worked 365 days a year, 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. They gave their children a life that they themselves never got to live. Pita watched all of this while growing up. He grew up in an affluent suburb of Toronto, surrounded by friends whose parents were doctors and lawyers, and he never felt like he belonged. That gap between what he saw and what he had became his fuel. 30 years later, six startups, four exits, and one failure. A term sheet pulled overnight in the 2008 financial crisis. A drive home to a wife who was 6 months pregnant, a second mortgage, everything gone. But what Peter actually built over those 30 years wasn't just companies. He built a framework for starting, scaling, and knowing when to leave. And more importantly, a way for understanding himself. I am Ashish, and this is the Founder's Stack. And today, we are going into what 30 years in the game actually looks like from the inside. My guest today is Peter Hwang, Korean Canadian serial entrepreneur for 30 years, six startups across completely different sectors: food, finance, fundraising, cannabis, and now groceries. Four exits, two management buyouts, one private equity sale, and one IPO that had close to $800 million at peak valuation. He now runs Tre'dish, a wholesale grocery app that cuts five steps out of the supply chain, and A-List Ventures, where he advises and invests in early stage founders. But today, I don't want to talk about his wins. I want to talk about everything that happened in between those wins. Hey Peter, how are you?
Hi, Ashish, how are you?
Good, good. Thanks for doing this, Peter. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Uh, so Peter, what we are looking to do is we are trying to understand the, origin of your story. So could you tell us about, where were you born, how your childhood was like? Why don't we start off with that?
Yeah, so it's a very typical kind of first generation immigrant story. My parents are first generation immigrants. They came from South Korea. Um, I was born in the United States. Um, I am the youngest brother of two older sisters. And my oldest sister was born in Korea, but my middle sister and I were born in the US. And then we immigrated to, left to Canada like when I was 1 year old. So basically, it was your typical immigrant story where parents left their kind of home country to make a better life for the family, the American dream, so to speak. And then, I guess what really, became the reality is, and this is kind of, again, many immigrant stories, that you can't transfer your education very easily. So when you're making that type of sacrifice, you kind of realize that it's not as simple as simply transferring your university education to try to get a job in the US or get a job in Canada. So yeah, my parents struggled. They did what typical generation immigrants do. And this is back in the 70s, mind you, right? So, now if people immigrate, they can almost do a gig working job where they can drive an Uber before they kind of recertify and kind of, recertify their education. That didn't exist back in the 70s, right? So my parents, so they settled. They did the, typical first generation immigrant story where Korean story very specifically, where they owned a convenience store, they bought a food franchise, and they bought a Baskin Robbins, and they owned a Baskin Robbins for 25 years in Canada. And it was a lot of hard work. It was extremely, difficult for them. And I saw it. I saw kind of growing up, obviously, seeing what they went through. But it was not a 9 to 5 job, Monday to Friday. It was literally, 365 days a year, every single day, including Christmas, where they worked from 10 a.m. in the morning to 10 p.m. at night, opening the store, closing the store. And essentially it was, they bought themselves a franchise, but they actually bought themselves a job, right? So it was very difficult. They did that for 25 years straight. And I just saw, the struggles that they went through and the sacrifice they went through. And it almost framed my thinking, as a whole, as I started to, you know, realize, okay, what do I want to do with my life? And seeing my parents sacrifice and struggle for that long, so you kind of see that with me and my two sisters. Like we did a lot of different things to try to get us outside or get us out of that, day to day, rat race or grind that they were going through, when they owned the franchise. So yeah, that was my upbringing. I think it was very scrappy in nature as an overall whole, but it kind of paved the way for my mentality going forward as an entrepreneur.
So, you mentioned your parents were almost working every day 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. Uh, you know, how did that kind of made you think that maybe even I'll do this, when I grow up and I'll also keep working, or what was the thought process behind it?
No, I didn't think that at all, to be honest. And again, if you kind of look at my background, we came from initially a very rough part of Toronto when we first immigrated here to Canada. And my parents did the typical thing where they like literally they moved into public housing. It was a very, very rough part of Toronto. And then they saved and saved and saved everything they owned to move us into a very affluent area in Mississauga, which is a suburb of Toronto. So it was amazing that they did that. If you kind of outside looking in, you kind of see what they sacrificed. It was a really great thing that they did for us. But if you actually think of our my upbringing, it actually almost created even more of a, insecure bubble, so to speak, because literally we lived in an amazing part of Mississauga. I never felt I belonged there. Like my all my friends' families were very affluent, came from doctors, lawyers, accountants. They all went on vacation. They had very different lifestyle. My parents were working shift work, right? They basically, always worked their butts off. And the reality was, I never really felt like, I belonged there. So in that community. So I had a lot of good friends growing up, don't get me wrong, but it kind of became fuel for me because there was definitely the imposter syndrome, is the feeling like you're kind of in a cage trying to figure, okay, how do you get out of this? So everything I did basically was just kind of working harder than anyone else. And, even from the mentality I had of like becoming an entrepreneur, I just realized like you got to work way harder than anybody because I was never really given anything. Right. So I think from the perspective of, when the learning that I had from day one, and this came from my parents, is like, if you have, if you have to earn your place, nothing is given. And if you don't stop pushing, you ultimately fall behind. So like really is like, it's that ability to just keep going and really kind of get your mindset into the mentality, which is like you got to work harder than anybody else. So that's the one thing that I can honestly say, even from my last 30 years as an entrepreneur, I definitely have this resilience and this mindset that I just work harder than anybody else.
Wow. Uh, Peter, uh, you know, so your goal was to essentially, get out of that cage sort of a thing. Am I correct? That your parents were kind of stuck in a loop, working day and night, for their children to have a comfortable and a good life. Am I correct?
That's correct. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And uh, so, how did you grow up? Like, I understand probably your parents who are not home, most of the time since they were working. So I believe you and your sisters, were at home studying and, doing all sorts of different jobs. Could you tell me about that? How did you manage?
Yeah, it became a family affair though, right? Like at the end of the day, I remember very clearly like working in the back and doing homework in the back of my parents' store. And, growing up, if I wasn't at my parents' store working in the back because they had to take care of me, I was at home with my sisters and they were feeding me. They were like raising me. So yeah, my sisters definitely took care of me most of the time. And then you get to that point where you become old enough that you work at the store, and then the entire operation, the entire, their work becomes your work, right? So you become almost like trapped in this entire like bubble. And what I saw every single day was like how hard that was. And again, if to be very candid and very blunt, what we didn't have, like we just worked every single day. Like so, and they worked, and my parents worked every single day, and my sisters worked every single day. So for us, it's like you develop the mentality, which is like if you don't want to continue doing this, then you got to formulate another path for you to succeed, right? So that's kind of where like I developed the resilience, I think, from a hard work perspective. But what I realized is that the what I was going to do was something very different. So if I'm being honest, like if I kind of look at my parents' struggle and what they sacrificed, I always talk about this in terms of like where the real appreciation happens for kids skips a generation. And what I mean by that is like my parents struggle. I know how hard they struggled, but I never really appreciated it. Like when I was growing up, I always thought of it as like, why couldn't we go on vacations? Why couldn't you work a regular 9 to 5 job? Why couldn't you do a number of different things that I saw my friends do? But you realize that their sacrifice was basically just to take care of us both financially and from a security perspective, right? So like I didn't accept it at the time. I actually thought I thought I was the victim, so to speak, right? So you realize really quickly, when that happens, you don't really appreciate what your parents do in terms of that sacrifice. Where I have a way big greater appreciation from it now is that it skips a generation. So if I look at my kids, my nieces, my sister's kids, they don't really have anything that they get concerned about. They think about, oh, well, why isn't our life like this? Because we provided them the stability that they have, that obviously that we wanted as kids. But the reality is, it skipped a generation. Like they would never know truly the sacrifice that we made for them, because it wasn't our sacrifice. It was my parents' sacrifice. So I always talk about this when it comes to like these type of stories. Usually it skips a generation in terms of like really where the pain lies and where all the struggle lies, because everything that my parents sacrificed really benefited greatly and tremendously my kids, and their kids, right? So that's kind of where you'll see all the sacrifices that happen, and there's always a trickle down effect.
Yeah, yeah, true. Uh, so Peter, do you think, having a family business background kind of helps people start their own businesses? Because I've often seen people, whose parents are running their own sort of business, find it way easier to, start their own ventures or their own businesses. Do you think it has some sort of correlation?
It depends. If it's, I wouldn't say my story is exemplary of that. Like, it doesn't exemplify that at all. Really, my story is basically I saw my parents how hard they worked, and therefore, and the sacrifice they made. So for me, it was far more of the context of like I saw how hard they worked, and I'm going to make sure that their hard work does not go to waste. So I got an education. I worked very hard. I always thought to myself, okay, how do I make money for my parents? Candidly, like I always thought to myself, like their sacrifice, I want to pay them off one day, or pay them back one day, and have them realize obviously their hard work didn't go to waste. So I think the hard work aspect for sure, as it pertains to the actual business side of it, yeah, like many times, entrepreneurs, if they're a lifetime entrepreneur and they pass a business or the mentality down to their kids, that's kind of when you see, obviously, there's a trickle down effect there. But when it comes to like um, my story, yeah, my parents, they worked a very hard life, and it was quite the opposite. If anything, their business was something that I never wanted to get into retail for that reason, right? I never really wanted to kind of be trapped in my own business. So I wanted to make sure anything I did had levels of freedom and levels of potential financial, security, but financial opportunity that I can definitely, see a pretty significant kind of financial windfall, for both myself and my family, right? So, and my parents. So that's kind of where I realized their sacrifice is what I learned from, and their hard work is what I learned from more than anything. Not necessarily, what they did, because I don't recommend a retail business for anyone, quite frankly.
Okay. And, what education did you take, by the way?
I had a political science degree and a minor in economics. And the reality is, I when I went to school, I was a football player, so I was an athlete in school. So I really always had the mentality of, just competing, I guess. But I never really used my education. Like I was considering becoming a lawyer at one point, but then I just got the entrepreneurial bug. I just realized, I want to start businesses, and I had that kind of drive, early on. And I always thought the mentality of the reason why I want to start businesses was always because I saw other people and other families that start businesses that they're doing very well for themselves. So I thought to myself, like, I want to actually get out of um, the trap that my parents were in, and I really want to have some financial freedom. So that was the first, like, when I first started off, that was the main, reason. It was primarily financial freedom and drive and try to actually, make a better life for myself and my family.
So this feeling you're talking about, it's when you were doing your education, or was it like in your childhood itself?
No, it was always in the childhood. Like when I grew up, I always knew
Hmm.
like I had this entrepreneurial drive. I always wanted to try something. So yeah, it was. I went to school to get an education because my parents wanted me to, my dad wanted me to. So I definitely, and my dad obviously, really wanted me to get a bank job. So my first job out of school was a bank job with a financial institution. So um, you realize you realize pretty fast, obviously, as you kind of get into, the working world. I had one corporate job and I was right out of school, and then I never had a corporate job after that. I basically started my sixth business right now, over 30 years. So I realized pretty quickly that I kind of had that entrepreneurial drive and spirit.
Wow. And you studied political science, right? How did that come out from political science to businesses? Any sort of correlation in that, or
There's
uh,
there's no real
how
there's
did
there's
it
no
come
real
to
cor
be?
there's no real correlation. I had an interest in law, and I thought one day, because I saw, a bunch of my friends' parents that were lawyers and stuff like that, and I thought I might want to become a lawyer, but I realized really quickly, like, my drive was to start businesses. I was very creative, and I was always thinking of kind of the next idea. So I always had in my mind, kind of early on, that I want to be a business owner and be an entrepreneur.
Great, great. And could you tell me when did you finally start your first venture?
Oh, it was right out of school. So I basically graduated from Wilfrid Laurier with my degree. My first job at a school was CIBC Finance, was with a bank, and then I was moonlighting at the same time. So I did your typical 9 to 5 job from Monday to Friday, but then Thursday, Friday, Saturday night. My very first business was, ironically, it was a restaurant franchise that I started called Extreme Pita. I started with a few different friends, and I did that on the side. So basically, I moonlighted where I would work 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, but then Thursday night, I would work at the restaurant until 3 a.m. in the morning and did that Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So that was my very first entrepreneurial venture, in which we took that to 3 locations. Like, we opened up 3 locations in a matter of, well, 2 locations and a third one in a matter of like less than a year. And then I ended up selling my shares to the owners, my partners, because a franchise development company came in and offered us an opportunity to expand the business. So I got an offer right away, and I sold my shares within the first year and a half. That was my
Wow,
first exit.
great. So within 2 years, you were able to exit your venture, correct? First venture.
Yes, that's right. That was my very first venture, was exited in less than 2 years.
Wow. And how did you take it? Did that kind of make you happy that, initially you told me your goal was to, free your parents from the from the trap. Uh, was this it? Was this enough, or you felt I need more?
No, 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 no. This is just a taste. This is like basically, honestly, that's a great question, because I think it was probably the understanding I had, which is basically, you as an entrepreneur, as a founder, you can build things, and you can build things pretty quickly to get them to a point where you can actually monetize them or sell them, right? So that's probably the first taste I had, which is basically you work hard, you have an idea, you work really hard, you get it to a certain level, and then you have the ability to liquidate or kind of sell your shares. Like that was the first opportunity where I realized, okay, like this is the mechanics of how entrepreneurship works, right? If you build something that someone wants and you build it in a very sound way, then you can find a way to find a market for it and ultimately sell your business. So even though that happened really quickly, to be honest, I don't think there's any methodical understanding I had of how to sell businesses because of Extreme Pita, because of that first business. It was very lucky because it happened so quickly and we were so young at a school. I was 20, I think I was 23 years old when I sold the business, right? So it was very young. It's not like I
Wow.
knew anything, but it was like at the very least it created a mentality which is like, okay, I have a taste of it now. I want to keep going. So that's kind of when I started my second, third, fourth. Yeah, from the next 25 years, all I did was start businesses.
Wow. And you know, why did you make the decision to, exit the company? Like, I believe, did all of your friends exit the company, or it was
There's
just you
five.
or
There's
a
five.
select few?
Yeah, there's five of us. So there's five of us, and there's two brothers that wanted to keep in the business, so they bought out all of our shares, the three other shares, and like I said, we were just young. We were young kids out of
Yeah.
school, right? So for us, it was like I got offered a pretty significant amount of money as a 22-year-old. So for me, I took it and I was like, I'm just moving on to the next thing. So at that point, it was a great offer at the time, and I was young, so I'm like, this is a good opportunity to move on to the next thing.
Wow. And were you still doing your job at that time, or you had left your job, working full time at this restaurant?
No, no, no. I always I was doing gig work before anyone else was doing gig work. So like and that was I always had kind of that on the side as a side hustle. And ironically, it's almost that was the first time when I realized that, there's an opportunity to actually make really, really good money by taking some risks and doing that. So when I was at the bank, I stayed there for another year, but then slowly, like right after I sold Extreme Pete, I was still working at the bank. And then ironically, my sales manager, my boss at the time at the bank asked me, he's like, hey, I know that you started this venture. Cause I was pretty open with him. I told him about my side hustle with Extreme Pita. He basically said, he's like, I have an idea, maybe you want to start something with me. So that's when I started my second venture with him, which was called Easy Lease, which was an equipment leasing company. So yeah, a lot of these just happen. These ventures just happen because you have opportunities in a pretty good time, good timing, and then you just kind of you go for it, right? So yeah, the timing was really, really good. I was still working at CBC Finance, sold my business, and then I automatically went into my second venture. That was basically similar to what I was doing at the finance company.
Wow. And you know, how long were you at this second company? And do you normally, people say that to be an entrepreneur, you need to be a full-time founder, not a part-time thing.
Yeah.
What would you say to that?
Yeah, this the second venture was definitely a full-time thing. Like I feel like my very first venture was getting my feet wet, so to speak. And then, when I got into my second venture, it was like a full-time job. I thought about it. Everything that went into it is myself and my partner. Again, it was my boss at my bank, sorry, the bank I worked at, that essentially approached me on it. And then we just spent basically 7 years building this out, and we built it out to a pretty big, equipment leasing brokerage called Easy Lease. We built that over approximately 7 years, and it was probably one of the biggest leasing companies, brokerage companies in Canada. And I got to the point where, yeah, it was my full-time job, working there consistently, doing very, very well. It was an amazing lifestyle business. We had 30 different brokers that were bringing in fees. So it was a fee-based business, doing phenomenally well. Um, and then I got to a point where I asked my partner, I said, I think I want to do something else. Would you want to buy my shares? And he ended up buying my shares off me. So that was my second exit, which it was a management buyout, in which he basically bought my portfolio.
Uh, so, what I'm trying to understand is at what time do you decide that, okay, the company has grown big enough that I would like to exit? Or is it more like a, yeah, my mind is not into it anymore. Maybe let's try something else. Is that how you go about it, or what is it?
No, no, I went about that in my early career, but again, as you keep in mind, I'm on my sixth startup, Ashish, right? So you develop a framework slowly but surely once you actually realize, okay, the idea goes into execution, and then you actually build I believe, kind of a 3-year framework, and then a 5-year framework. So basically, a 3-year framework is basically the gestation period. I call it the gestation period, where you are trying to build out the concepts, you're trying to build the operational model, you're trying to get the product market fit, see if it works, and then you have signaling that, okay, after 3 years, my actual concept works. So you have something that actually you have proof of concept, and you have actually, I call product market fit, where things are actually working. And then from years 3 to 5 or 3 to 6, that's when you have basically a foundation that works. So you're just scaling it up. So that's kind of what I built a framework around many of my kind of concepts and ideas, where you get to that 3-year kind of gestation period, and you realize, okay, I have something that's working, and my concept actually has legs. And then now from 3 years onwards, that's when you get to the point where I can actually like scale it up. So when you scale it up, when I talk about that next threshold of like past 5 years, at that point you have an optionality for exit. And it's an option for exit where it doesn't mean you're selling your company, but you've built a company that is really sound, that's really smart, has likely recurring revenue, and it's at a point where you have the option to sell it. So I've done that a couple of times, with my later exits, but it was always based on the premise of like building a proper framework first.
Uh, Another question I had is, normally whenever founders are building their companies, whenever they are pitching to investors, they often say, you know what, we'll get to IPO and stuff like that. But you, on the other hand, you took secondary exits, right? Selling your shares to management, or directly, private exits essentially, not going through the public way. What do you think should be the decision process to know if you are the kind of founder who can take your company till the IPO stage, or probably, exit at a earlier stage?
So my first two exits were management exits. The second two exits were private equity and IPO. So again, this is kind of when you build a framework around how you actually, grow and scale your company, you get to the point where you have optionality for a liquidity event or optionality for a sale.
Yeah,
And that's kind of what I did with the two
makes
companies
sense.
I sold, Global Faces and Newstrike, where they were companies that hit a certain threshold. And I realized, okay, there was a really good kind of concept here that was actually working very, very well. One company, we grew and scaled it. That private equity approached us, and we ended up selling to them. And the other company was an IPO because we just happened to be in a very fast, high growth momentum type of industry in cannabis, and we ended up IPOing that. So to answer your question, like there's I think early on, if I'm being honest, like the first two exits I had were very small in scale, right? They were operational businesses, and I never had the opportunity to effectively have large liquidity events. But then as you kind of realize, okay, here's how I'm building businesses, you learn from the previous, exit of the previous startup, and then you stack on top of that, right? So that's kind of what I did. And from now, from this point onwards, like everything I do is built off frameworks, right? So it's learnings from my kind of previous exits, my previous startup. So to answer your question, that's kind of why I had multiple different exits and multiple different builds in different kind of realms. So for me, whether it's IPO, private equity, management buyouts, I kind of have that experience. I can talk about all of them because I've done all of them, right? So that's kind of where you realize, and you learn from each, previous startup, previous exit.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. So when did you exactly exit your second startup? This was in which year?
It was in 2005.
Okay. And after that, you started another venture, or what happened after that?
Immediately, so I started the third venture, and this is the one that failed. So when I talk about 5 startups, 4 exits, I have one exit that failed. Sorry, one company that failed, and that was the company. That was my third startup. So everything that I made in the first 2 startups, I gave back on the third one, which I pretty much lost everything. So it's again it's the roller coaster ride that you go through with entrepreneurship. But I started my third business in 2006, and it was a great business that I built off of learnings from my previous off of Easy Lease, because I built these finance programs for these companies, and then I happened to look at a concept. I said, okay, I want to start this, and it was basically the it was the energy retrofit sector, in which we were providing energy retrofits for homes and also providing them grants and rebates from the governments, but also financing that equipment. So because I had a finance background, I was able to build like a finance portfolio of all these clients that we were, putting energy efficient equipment home in their, sorry, energy efficient equipment in their homes, and we're financing that equipment to them. So I built a portfolio of close to 15,000 customers. I think we were doing 15 million in revenue, and that was my first experience to now take a company public. So that's probably the biggest. Again, like I said, you all your learnings come from your failed startups, and that was like I learned so much from that, both from a mental perspective, both from a um, change in markets, like fluctuation of markets perspective. The fact that you can't, play a victim, so to speak, when it comes to the market's turning, because you don't know when it's going to happen. But that company, like I said, I built up to a pretty significant run rate of revenue. We hit $15 million run rate of revenue, 15,000 customers. I got approached, so we approached a company to take the company public. I had a term sheet to go public. That was what the fuck was $5 million term sheet to fund the company and go public. And then 2008 hits. So early 2008, we were planning the entire IPO, and July 2008 hits, where the financial crisis happens, the housing market collapses, and our term sheet gets pulled immediately. And then the deal was off. So again, it was a very tough time, and I could talk about that for a lot in terms of the learnings, but that was probably one of the most difficult times I went through, because, I talk about market momentum and market turns and market timing being one of the most, like, the greatest determinants of success or failure, is because sometimes you just can't control what the markets do, and that was exactly what happened with NYS.
I would love to know if you could, talk more about this, because I think failure is something which every founder, should, at some point in life, get to know and learn from it. If you could walk me through, the circumstances and how you got through it, that would be great.
Yeah, it was, like I said, it was one of those things that I think the mentality I had was that everything was going amazingly, and like I said, like, you go from being on top of the world because you're developing a really fast growing business, and you sign a term sheet to go public because you're building a fast growing business, and everything is pointing to the momentum of this thing is going to be, an amazing opportunity to grow the business, but also have a pretty significant liquidity event for shareholders and for myself. So you realize pretty quickly that, 2008, it was a tough time. Like, the financial crisis happened, every business that was kind of in the markets at that point, they either had their business terminated, they went bankrupt, or any sort of financing probably was stripped from them as well. So I remember the email very, very specifically. It wasn't dramatic, it was just final. It was basically saying, as per clause 14.2, whatever the clause was, and the clause was basically financial crisis, or like act of God type of crisis, is like the deal's off. And at that moment, it wasn't just a business, it was kind of my identity. Up until then, I was the founder of a growing company that was about to go public. And then overnight I wasn't. So I remember that drive home. It was like one of the longest drives of my life. Not because obviously it was like I lived far away from my house, but because I was kind of rehearsing in my mind how to explain, the situation to my wife and what was going on. And at that point, it was, yeah, this is a very personal story, but my wife is pregnant at that point. She was 6 months pregnant. We had two young daughters. We had a third on the way. She was 6 months pregnant. We had a pool project that we are building in the backyard. And I remember her very specifically. Like, I was looking through the kitchen window when I got home. She was in the backyard, looking over the backyard, and she was 6 months pregnant. I don't know why she was doing this. She was digging a trench for whatever reason, and she was helping. like just plan everything for the construction team to come in. And it was almost like a surreal experience because she was basically planning a project that we could no longer afford. And I remember that moment. It was the purest definition of how I felt. It was financial stress. It was guilt. It was the responsibility I had. It was a realization that maybe I wasn't cut out for entrepreneurship because it was like maybe I never expected failure to hit me that hard, or that I didn't expect it to be that dramatic. And then what I realized is probably the biggest learning that you have is, and this it's not cliche, but you learn the most from your failures than you do more from the fails than you do from your successes. And I'll tell you why. Because that moment when, and keep in mind, Sydney and I have been together since we were young, right? So she's been with me since the ups and downs, and she was with me for the first two exits. She was with me kind of building a home, starting a family. And so she has supported me the entire time. And I remember when I told her that we pretty much lost everything because we had a second mortgage on the house because I invested into this company, my own company. Um, I asked her, I told her point blank, like, I think we're going to be in trouble, financial trouble. And it was probably about 2 hours of like tears and very emotional kind of responses back and forth. And then she looked at me and said, like, listen, like, I understand the situation, but the reality is we came from nothing. We built a family together. We built a life together. Like, if we have to start over again, we'll be just fine. And that's probably what you realize more than anything as an entrepreneur is like people who you surround yourself with. And by the way, I'm not just talking about spouse. I'm talking about like it could be a co-founder, it could be friends, it could be colleagues. It's likely a spouse, a partner. If they understand the sacrifices that go through and the ups and downs with entrepreneurship, then you probably have something that can get you through hard times and the best times. And that's kind of what I realized there is like having a partner that was supportive of me is the only thing that got me through, the next chapter, of what happened next. And like I said, I've had two other life-changing exits and Cindy's been there the entire time. So it kind of goes to show you that like if you have a rock and you have a partner that can support you through the bad times, um, obviously it's an amazing feeling when you have the good times with them as well.
What Peter just described is something most founders would never say it out in public. He didn't just lose a company, he lost who he thought he was. He was the founder of a growing company about to go public. And then one email invoking some clause of a term sheet changed that overnight. What's striking is that his recovery wasn't very strategic. It wasn't a pivot plan or a product market fit exercise. It was a partner who looked at him after 2 hours of tears and said, "We came from nothing, we'll just be fine." That's the part that never makes it into the investor deck. Let's continue. Yeah. In this third startup, did you have a co-founder or it was just you, a solo founder?
It was just me. I was solo founder.
Oh, and in the first two, once you had co-founders, do you think this kind of made you think in your future startups that maybe I need a co-founder or not really?
Um, yeah, I think yes and no. I think it really is the circumstances of the time. Like, I don't think you pick and choose in your brain that, hey, I need a founder, I need a co-founder. In many respects, you just basically have an idea. If you're the one thinking of the idea, you have an idea, and then you typically bring co-founders into the mix. So when I say I was a solo founder, I had people that started the company with me, but in this particular case, I was the one that was, front and center. I was the one that was in front of shareholders, in front of media, in front of the team and stuff. So I was the one that was taking on all the brunt of the responsibility, right? Whether it be good or bad. So when I say solo founder, I had partners as well that were with me, but the reality is they weren't at the forefront, right? So if I look at my fourth business, I had three other co-founders in which all four of us had equal shares, equal weight. equal responsibility. So yeah, my fourth business was something that, to your point, was a very different business I ran and I built. And that was probably the one business where I realized having four co-founders that work very much in tandem with each other and they have very different responsibilities, but they all converge into the same kind of leadership and same partnership. That was the best business I've ever built.
Wow. Uh, so I am assuming you managed to, shut down your third startup and then you started your fourth one. Am I correct?
I did, yes. That's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How did the
I, I,
fourth one
I
come
had
to
about
be?
two. I had about 2 years. I had about 2 years in which I basically had a quiet
Oh, okay.
period, just trying to get
Hmm.
over, obviously, the um the loss of the business, and I learned a lot, learned a lot about myself, and then I realized I wanted to get back into entrepreneurship again. So yeah, so that's kind of when I started the fourth
Wow.
business.
I I would love to know what happened in those 2 years. Like, what things did you do to finally feel like, yeah, okay, I can put this behind and start again. How much was the role of your family, and also what all things you did that finally help you get out of the rut, as we say.
Yeah, it was definitely a quiet period. Like you just have to realize there's a lot of like, kind of self-reflection that you have, which is, failure is one of those things that it defines your life at that moment in time, and it almost feels like almost all-encompassing and kind of suffocating a little bit. Like you feel like, what could I have done differently? You second guess yourself. You wonder if, you always wonder if could have done some things differently. But then in retrospect, you kind of look back at it and you say, okay, listen, like a lot of your character is built on how built after you have that failure and what you do after that, right? So, I've for 2 years I just realized, okay, what do I have to do to get my confidence back, and what do I do to actually realize, okay, this is this entrepreneurial life for me? And I did consulting. I was going to get a job with another company, and that I really kind of looked at the 2 years just to take some quiet period and downtime, just to realize, okay, do I have it in me to become an entrepreneur again? And I realized, yeah, I have this creative mind, and I have this like kind of thirst for kind of building things and building widgets, so to speak. And for me, it's like it didn't go away, and that's kind of when I realized, okay, I got to try something else. And it definitely is difficult after a failure. It's difficult to kind of realize, okay, I'm ready to start something else, because you just don't know if you have it in you again, right? So I realized, during that 2 years, again, thought a lot of self reflection, a lot of understanding of like what my skill set was and what I can do, what I can't do. Yeah, and then honestly, the fourth startup happened very organically because I had partners, I had these individuals approach me because they work with me, ironically, in the failed startup, in the third business. So they were a
Oh,
sales agency. They were a sales
mhm.
agency for me, and ironically, they were a sales agency for me that didn't really work that well. We didn't have a great partnership, but they loved the fact of my background. They loved my hustle, and they loved the fact that I built this big company that they were doing services for. They said, Peter, like, I have this, I know NY's didn't work out for us, but I have this other idea. So they approached me with the idea, in which my first thought process was like, I wasn't sure if I love this idea, but like, let me hear more about it. And when I heard more about it and we kind of built out the company, I realized, okay, there's an opportunity, real opportunity here. So then all four of us kind of, again, we're 25% owners each, equal owners, and we kind of built the company together. And we built it over a 6 year period and sold to private equity. And that was, like I said, that was probably one of my best builds, for many different reasons. Like one being like it started from a place where, yeah, it started as more of a place where I was getting my footing again. It started from a place where I had three great partners that were supporting me the entire way. It started from a place where I could focus on what I was really, really good at, which is a lot of the strategy, business development, corporate development, kind of building the company, the frameworks of the company. And then I had three great partners, amazing at operations and sales. So like all four of us were working kind of in tandem with each other. So yeah, it was a great way to kind of resurrect my entrepreneurial journey, and then realize, okay, I have this in me. I actually like building startups again.
Wow. And what was this company about, if you don't mind?
Yeah. So basically, this company was it was a fundraising company that provided fundraising services on behalf of every charity in the world. So my fourth company was called Global Faces, and if I'm not sure if they have these, where you live, Ashish, but in North America, in the UK, everywhere, basically charities fundraise by having multiple different methods of fundraising. The one method that everybody uses is face-to-face fundraising. So people that knock on your door, people that stand on street corners, people that stand in events where they try to fundraise and bring on monthly donors on behalf of the charities. So I ran Global Faces was the largest face-to-face fundraising organization on behalf of every charity in the world. So we had, at our inception, or sorry, at our highest level before we sold to private equity, I think we had 40 charities with 30 offices across North America. We had close to 1,000, fundraisers knocking on doors, standing on street corners that were fundraising on behalf of every charity. So it was a big, large scale organization, but in which we were raising money and monthly donors on behalf of every charity. But the thing that really created our moat and created the valuation, like elevated our valuation, was the fact that we had market timing. We market times everything perfectly because it was the inflection of like, and the changeover from like paper applications to tablets. So everyone you see standing knocking on your door or standing on the street corner have tablets now. So if they represent World Vision or Red Cross or any charity, those are like anyone you've seen in North America, they're my fundraiser. And we digitize the process from paper applications. So typically you'd have someone knocking on your
Yeah,
door that would basically, hey, Mr.
yeah.
Mrs. Jones, like, let's sign you up. We actually digitize that to tablets, and then we were able to basically collect all of our data and all the payment processing via tablet, but we also aggregated all the data impressions on behalf of the charity. So we own all the aggregated data. So I would literally track 200,000 points of impression based data on a daily basis. So it was a big, massive personalized data play in which private equity, when they approached us, they loved our kind of run rate and ramp up of revenue, but they also really valued kind of the data asset that we aggregated. So, that was why we were able to sell the company for as much as we did.
Wow. Peter, one thing I've realized is in all of your four startups that you've mentioned till now, all four of them have been, in different sectors. How has your, experience been across all of these sectors? Obviously, there has been this common link of financing part that probably you also do specialize in, but how has your experience been?
Yeah, everyone asks that same question actually, because a lot of founders and entrepreneurs, what they typically will do is that they'll start in one sector, and then if they have a exit in that sector, they'll usually wait like a 2-year non-compete period and then restart a company again, right? That's one type of entrepreneur. I'm not that type of entrepreneur. I think I'm very much an entrepreneur that's industry and sector and idea agnostic. Like for me, I'm just really curious. I've always been curious, and I look at companies based on the problems that we're trying to solve and the industries that we're trying to disrupt. So I look at things a little bit differently, and maybe that I don't know if that makes me somewhat unique or maybe somewhat a little bit more risky. But I really love learning, and I really love trying to solve problems. So yes, every single industry has been different, and every single industry kind of comes from the overarching kind of curiosity around, can I solve a problem, the big problem that exists with a solution. So that's kind of what you kind of see, in the patterns of my startup. So I think that's probably why when I look at even obviously funding and investing in companies right now, I kind of look at that same mentality, which is basically how big is the problem that we're trying to solve, and is a solution that this founder is trying to figure out, can they solve that problem, right? So, and is there a methodology and a framework that they apply to it? So I've done that, throughout my entire career. And yeah, you're right, Ashish. I don't look at the same industry over and over again because that's not what drives me as an entrepreneur. What drives me is like solving big problems and building a solution around them.
Four industries, four exits, no repeated playbook. Most entrepreneurs stay in their lane. They build expertise in one sector and stay there. Peter doesn't have a lane. What he has is a framework and a belief that the problem is always more important than the sector. He tried retirement at 45. It lasted around a year and a half. Let's talk about what brought him back and what he's betting on now. Hmm. And okay, so once you exited the fourth startup, did you immediately again start a fifth one, or do you normally have a cool down period, before you jumped into the fifth one?
No, ironically, it's I actually I moonlighted a little bit. So basically, I started Global Faces in 2012, and then my fifth startup, I was working and operating Global Faces the entire time. But in 2014, there was an opportunity to basically start a company that was in a basically a high momentum sector, which was the cannabis industry. So I this was more of an investment and an opportunity just to catch a moment in time. So while I was at Global Faces, in 2014, I also co-founded, by the way, this is more of an idea that we're building off of because in 2014 was the time when Canada federally legalized the sale and production of cannabis, and it was the first industrialized country in the world that legalized it. So, and it was legal. It's legal medically in other different countries in the world, but Canada was the first country that actually legalized it from every aspect, both federally, um, medically, recreationally, and from a financial perspective too. So people like companies were actually going public in IPOing in Canada, and you had companies all across the world in the US, in Germany, in Australia that were coming to Canada to actually do their public listing. So it was the first country that fully federally legalized every aspect of cannabis. So we saw that announcement come out, and we were one of the early entrants and early applicants of a license. So in 2014, we kind of applied for a license, and it was a lot of very much wait and see. So ironically, when I did my fifth startup, nothing really happened until 2015, 2016 period, right? So I was operating Global Faces for 3 to 4 years prior to anything really happening in Newstrike. So I almost look at Newstrike as basically it was almost like a science experiment a little bit because we were just getting catching a momentum wave at the time. And we were at the right place, the right time. We got our application early enough, and then we ended up getting our license in 2015, 2016. And then that's when you saw this massive tidal wave of opportunity because once we got our license, we end up signing a public listing. We end up raising, you're not going to believe this, but we raised $170 million, off of two
Wow.
financings. And we did that within a year period, very, very fast. And it was literally almost at the inflection point of like when I was about to sell Global Faces and we raised all this money that we had to do a lot with it. So I was consulting for Newstrike, the cannabis company, and I was on the board of directors of the public company the entire time. But right when I sold Global Faces, I came on as president of Newstrike, and then my job was to essentially kind of build the distribution across Canada very, very fast. So it was a blur, but literally within a 16-month period, we ended up building distribution, building a facility, um, selling, across multiple different provinces across Canada. And then we ended up getting approached by Molson Coors Hexo, a company, and they ended up buying us, within like 15, 16 months. So it was a crazy, crazy period of time. And our public company kind of rode up, to a high valuation. I think it was just under $800 million valuation. That's when we raised the money we did.
Wow.
And then we ended up selling the company, 2 years later. So just under 2 years later. So it was a
Wow.
crazy time, and all that happened, back to back. So I ended up selling Global Faces in 2018. I ended up selling Newstrike, we were a public company, but we ended up selling to Molson Coors Hexo about 15 months later.
Wow. So, roughly how much money have you made in all of your exits, and how much money did you lose in your, failed startup, would you say?
Oh gosh. Yeah, yeah. If I look at the entire exit, so I'll give you rough estimates, and you can kind of
Yeah, 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 sure.
determine what kind of like percentage owner I was. So basically, in the public company, we sold that company for $350 million. I was, one of the largest shareholders in the company. In Global Faces, we sold the company to private equity for mid eight figures. I was 25% owner of that company. So my last two exits, it's like it's true. The last, the more you stay in the game, so to speak, is when you have much larger exits. So the last two exits were my life-changing exits. Global Faces and Newstrike, they're my life-changing exits.
Yeah.
Everything before then were kind of small, incremental, learning experiences, but they weren't life-changing in any way, shape, or form. So that's why I always talk about staying in the game long enough and learning. Like you do realize everything becomes incremental, right? You kind of stack on building blocks on top of a framework, on top of a framework, and it's all based on learning. So if you stay in the game long enough, then you realize like your experience kind of becomes far more incremental and your experience becomes something that you kind of build really great businesses with, right? So it's not cliche. I've done it, over 30 years.
Wow. And now, when you look back, probably in the first two startups, do you think you exited a bit too early, or no, it's still a learning and you feel you did the right thing back then?
Oh gosh, no, the first two startups are exactly that. Like they're learning experiences, right? Like my first startup, we were kids out of high school
Yeah.
that just happened to build a cool concept that happened to grow really, really, really quickly, right? So I don't think there's anything that in there that was like framework related or things that we built off of like learnings, right? That was just like we're flying off the seat of our pants, and we built a good business. I happened to sell it really quickly. My second business was a little bit more of a lifestyle business where I built a portfolio of clients and I had a really good recurring revenue. So my partner bought my portfolio. So that was like those were two businesses that were like really good, but they were never destined to like have a big liquidity event or big exit, right? From the third startup onwards, that's when I got really into the mentality of like, okay, I really want to build something bigger and build something that has the opportunity to go public, build something that has the opportunity to have like mass kind of distribution across multiple different kind of geographic territories. So that's when, after the third startup, that's when I thought way bigger, and I thought kind of there's a much bigger opportunity for me to actually not only grow and scale that company, but have a large liquidity event, and that's what happened.
Okay. And regarding your fourth startup, the cannabis one, uh, how did you meet up with your co-founders?
Oh, my one of my co-founders is my brother-in-law, and we were
Oh, okay.
co-investors. Yeah, we're co-investors in a few
Mhm.
different businesses. So
Okay.
yeah, he was a CEO and I was the president.
Oh, okay. So did you initially start off as an investor and later on transition into a role, or what exactly happened?
No, we were all like somewhat passive investors because there was nothing
Oh,
really like the way the licensing process worked is that you had to apply for the license, build your facility before you got your license.
oh,
So the
okay.
first 2 3 years, there was no operations, right? It was just basically just investments. So we're all just investors in the company.
Okay.
And then it got to the point once you got your license, then it became operational.
Wow. Great. And so I'm assuming you exited your fourth startup, by 2020, fourth and fifth?
Yeah, my fourth startup was early. Sorry, Global Faces was my fourth startup.
Yeah, yeah.
Newstrike, the cannabis company, is my
Yes.
fifth. So Global Faces we exited in early 2018, and Newstrike we exited in 2019, mid 2019. So it was a bit roughly 15, 16 months apart from each other.
And now you have been building Tre'dish, am I correct? That's your
I
current
am.
startup.
Yeah,
Could you tell me
I
more? Yeah.
sure. Yeah, I basically sat after I retired for about a year and a half, 2 years almost, not even. I'm probably retired for about a year and a half. Um, I started a family office, which it called A-List Ventures, in which I was investing in a few different companies. And then I always joked about not having the bug again, but I realized, I was still young at the time. When I retired, I was 45 at the time. I realized I was too young. My kids were still young, and if I was gonna retire, you know, at that point, it was way too early. So I decided to have my sixth startup, which is Tre'dish. And I want to build it around the entire premise of like, this is more of a passion project for me, but it happens to be a passion project that really is it's in a sector that has a big problem with it, right? So if I think of like Tre'dish, it's the hardest thing I've ever built. It's not even close, right? Like if I think of like the thought process around cost of living right now, cost of living is an all-time high, specifically in Canada. Groceries and food is the second highest expense in a family household, and the problem exists where you're really capped at what you have in terms of discretionary income. If I look at, you
Uh,
know, if I look at
Before,
kind of,
could I interrupt you? Could you tell me
sure.
what does Tre'dish do first?
Yeah, Tradish is we provide wholesale groceries. Um, we have a wholesale grocery app that goes direct from wholesalers right to consumers. So we eliminate five different points in the supply chain. So we're not a bricks and mortar store, and we're not like an Instacart that buys and delivers groceries from grocery stores. We eliminate all those costs in between. So we've negotiated deals and procured deals with wholesalers, suppliers, butchers, farmers, and then we use our app to basically send product and send groceries directly from those wholesalers right to the consumer. So we kind of bypass all the middlemen steps, and therefore we save close to 25 to 30% savings on someone's groceries. So that was a big problem that we were trying to solve because,
Mhm.
like I said, like food costs are an all-time high right now, and people can't afford life. Like in Canada and the US, like cost of living is an all-time high, and people's discretionary income have not caught up, right? So for us is like if I can solve the problem of optimizing the supply chain and getting people better quality, fresher groceries, because we're cutting out all those supply chain steps at a fraction of the costs, then that's a problem that I wanted to solve. So that's kind of what we've been building over the last, 3, 4 years.
Wow. And are you doing this alone or do you have co-founders in this venture?
I have a co-founder. Yeah. I have a co-founder
And
that started with me. He is the technical co-founder, but he's also, my co-founder from a strategy and brain trust perspective. So him and I kind of built it together.
how did you meet your co-founder? Did you work with him previously or?
No, I didn't. I met him because he was a programmer that came on that was always kind of building out the app for us. So you realize it's like everything, right? You realize and by the way, I've had multiple different kind of people come in and out of the business, right? Like it's like everything, right? When you start a business, you have co-founders or you have founding partners that some stay, some don't. So psychologically, you have to just realize that and understand that, right? Because things get hard. When 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 I always talk about this, and this just could be something that obviously we can talk about, but every single venture and every single entrepreneurial founder has two moments of clarity. One is in the beginning and one is in the end. And I call it the bookends. Like the beginning part is when you first have your concept and idea and you tell people about it. Everyone loves it. Everyone thinks it's a fantastic idea. So that's kind of the moment of clarity you have, which is like, I'm going to go for it because, everyone seems to have like a really great affinity for this idea. That's one moment of clarity you have. The second moment of clarity you have is when you either exit or you shut down the business. Everywhere in between is a roller coaster ride where you have uncertainty, you have friction, you have trying to figure things out. You don't know, what you don't know. So I've had many different co-founders in the business, like in this business, in which basically we're kind of going through this like roller coaster ride. But Jack is my one co-founder that we built from day one that we built this together. So he was my technical co-founder, but he's also become again my strategic partner to figure out how to actually build the business model and rebuild the business model. So yeah, so it was like you need that. Like you're going to go through every startup founder is going to go through multiple different kind of ups and downs, especially when it comes to like individuals that might be on the founding partner team, or they might think that they're the founding partners, but it might not work. Like you have to be able to accept that.
You have been in six startups, and one thing I've seen is in every startup you have had a different co-founder, right? So probably in six startups, six different sets of co-founders, except for the third one where you were a solo one. I would love to know, what do you think about before, either joining someone or, onboarding someone as a co-founder? What is your process for that?
Well, I want to clarify. So my brother-in-law has been involved in three of the businesses.
Oh,
So my
okay.
brother-in-law was also an investor. So him and I invested in each other's business. So I would consider him somewhat a co-founder because
Yeah.
he's also been part of my brain trust, so to speak,
Mhm.
right? So, so I usually you have to have one common thread, common thread that's crazy as you when you're building businesses and thinking about businesses. But operationally, you're gonna have different co-founders that come in the mix every single time. So Jay, who's my brother-in-law, he was one of the first investors into my third business that failed. He was an investor in my fourth business. He was the first check that came into the fourth business, and the fifth business, which was cannabis, he was the CEO. I was the president. So again, I would consider him somewhat of a co-founder, even though he wasn't operationally for any one of these businesses. But I'm not sure what your question was, Ashish. Your question was, how do you
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
determine?
Yeah, yeah. If a person can be a co-founder or he cannot be a co-founder.
Yeah, I don't really have a distinction. Here's my honest take about this. I
Mhm.
think anyone that comes in early stage in a company, you don't know who your co-founders are, and to put a label on them day one before you have any POC or product market fit is a mistake because individuals that might be employees early on, they might ultimately become your co-founder if that makes sense. Like you don't know what you don't
Yeah.
know, right? So
Mhm.
so many like Jack, for example, at Tre'dish, he was a young technical like programmer, and but he was there since day one. If you asked me when we first started the company if he was my co-founder, he was not my co-founder at Tre'dish, but he's been there since day one. So if I think of the all the different individuals, and there's been a few of them that have come and gone in Tre'dish because again, like I said, the uncertain middle, the lonely middle, like the uncertainty that happened. A few of individuals that I thought were co-founders, they left. They are no longer with the company. But then Jack stayed here the entire time. So like again, I don't put a label on the term co-founder because you realize as you start to progress the business and you figure things out, your co-founders actually come out of the woodwork, right? You realize, who your co-founders truly are because
Yeah,
they stick around in the business, right?
yeah. And Peter, another thing I've seen is up till now, except for one startup, most of the other startups you were part of were the ideas of other founders. Am I correct? Except for the third one and this one.
Yeah, yes. Newstrike, yes. Newstrike was a
Uh,
colleague that gave us the idea. Google Faces were my partners that approached me. Um, Extreme Pita was a collection of all of our ideas.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's a combination. It's a
Yeah,
combination of
yeah, yeah,
both.
yeah. And since this one you say is really special to you, is it because it was also because you are really passionate about the idea, as compared maybe to the other startups where execution was more the key than the just the idea?
Yeah, this one is far more of a passion project for me to the extent of like I believe we're solving a big problem. And
Hmm.
my whole thinking was if I can slowly realize how this problem can be solved, then we're disrupting a pretty big industry. If I think of the grocery sector is like this old, antiquated, very kind of old school type of sector in which the supply
Hmm.
chain works in a very specific way, where you have like 5 points in the supply chain going to the grocery store. Everyone's accepting of it, and everyone just believes that's the way it should be. But the problem is that groceries are at such a high cost right now that people can't afford them. So my thinking was always basically like, if there's a way to disrupt it, let's figure it out. And so it's been I consider it a passion project because it's very hard, it's very difficult, and I've funded the startup. So it's like it's always in the mentality that I have for this one, where I had the finances to basically fund the startup. Um, I had the thought processes like if we actually start slow and start building off of it, then and we figure it out, then we kind of scale it. So now we're at a point right now where we have all the infrastructure built, the foundation built. Our customer acquisition cost, CAC to LTV ratio is actually a really sound level. So we're now at a point where we're raising kind of a late seed round. So yeah, like
Wow.
I'm pretty excited about it because a lot of this was like built off of the premise of like let's start slow. But now that we're seeing this inflection point, we want to grow and scale fast. So I think we're going to raise probably, a late seed round in the next few months.
Wow, wow, great. Uh, and Peter, as we move towards the end of this, I would love to know, up till now you have raised a lot of rounds for your startups. You have got a lot of exits. What do you think is the key to getting, investors, to invest in your company, or, how to exit your company? Is there any sort of, framework for that you have?
There is, yeah. I think there's two things. If you're talking about like the seed round or like almost like
Hmm.
pre-seed, seed round, the concept
Yeah, yeah,
idea
the
where
initial
you don't
stages. Yes.
the initial stage. So that's one. The initial stage is basically um you have to have a problem that is disrupt. I call it the four walls theory. So you have to have a problem that extends four walls, meaning like if your addressable market is big enough and your strategy to deploy out into the SOM, like your serviceable obtainable market, is sound enough, then you should have a recipe. Meaning like you should be able to prove to a bigger audience, whether it be an investor audience or even friends and family that invest in the seed round, you should be able to show them exactly what that stage looks like. Like ideas, everyone has a good idea, but the idea combined with the execution of how you actually execute against it is really, really critical. And that's kind of where if you basically have a pretty good framework to show exactly how you're actually launching your pilot test, how you can take again that big problem, take a really good market that you can actually attack and actually get a small proof point on it, then then you have a one-to-one correlation with basically you can raise a little bit of money to prove it out. That's kind of where I look at every one of these investor decks. If it has that one-to-one correlation in terms of the problem is big enough, the four walls are extended big enough, you have a very good framework to actually start small and develop like an ICP and a repeatable process around like here's a small cohort on this pilot test that it's working on, and then all of a sudden now you can extend out to a bigger group of people and a bigger ICP. Then you have your recipe. That's kind of where that's how you raise funds. Like you have to have things that are logical in nature. Um, it's very different now, if I'm being honest. It's very different now because when you raise seed funds, you also have you have to do it with a very scrappy mentality because with AI and the tools, and we talked about this earlier, with Claude and Claude Code and everything that you can do for significantly less expensive and less friction, you now have an opportunity to actually build something out with less money. So there's going to be that as well. Like fundraising is not a definitive, science anymore. Before it was. Now it's more of an art because literally you can actually build a pretty big company with very little tools and little resources. So a lot of that, you have to think through and you have to be able to think, okay, what can I do to, raise less money and be far more efficient in terms of how to get the product market fit. So a lot of that is, again, there's a framework around that for sure. Your
And
second question, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, 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 yeah. Please finish. Yeah.
No, I was gonna say your second question was basically how do you exit a company? And that's the framework I always talk about is that 3 year gestation period and the 5 year
Yeah.
5 year optionality.
Mhm.
I built that out where that's kind of
Yeah.
what I look at for every one of companies as well as my own company.
Yeah, yeah. And uh, Peter, when you are raising funds at an initial stage, how much do you think your network matters? I mean, I know by now you already have a good network of investors who you can call and simply say, "Hey, I'm starting this. Does this interest you?" But at the initial stage, in the earlier years when you did not have this network, what exactly, help you? Did cold emails help you, or did you focus more time on getting referrals, or what exactly worked?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think a lot of there is a lot of noise out there, as we all know. Like even cold emails are really difficult these days because everyone is using Apollo and everyone is using the same kind
Yeah.
of cold email templates. I think if I look at my LinkedIn DMs, I probably get a DM at least like twice a day in regards to people that are looking for money. So it's like it's a very busy kind of space right now. So I think honestly, if I look at kind of the first thought process around how important a network is, it is very important for your initial raise. Like you either have to have a fantastic idea that's on the cutting edge and the ability to kind of pitch that out there. But those, again, keep in mind, everyone has really good ideas, right? So I think the network is pretty important in the initial stage of like a pre-seed idea stage where you have to be able to convince a really kind of close network that your idea is a really good idea and they can support it. And that could be friends, family, high net worth individuals that are within your network. Those are usually, especially for first time founders, like that probably is kind of where you're going to raise your first funds. And again, the exceptional rule is if you have something that's so cutting edge and so kind of outside the box that everyone's like, wow, this is an idea that I can pitch to multiple different people because you just discovered something and have an idea that's so on the verge of cutting edge. But again, there's so many ideas similar to that out there right now. So I think the network is really, really important, for your initial raise for sure.
Okay, so from what I understood, at the initial stage when you are just building out your network, the best way to go about it is initially just raise from friends, family, and people whom you already know from high network individuals. And
That's
then,
that's all that's always gonna be the first.
and then build out some good metrics, good financials, and then for the next round, you can probably approach actual investors. Am I correct?
That's right.
Yeah, yeah. And later on, once you have had, successful exits like you have, you probably, have investors who can jump in at a lot earlier stage.
Yeah, yeah, and then they have networks as well. So again, this
Yeah, yeah,
it,
yeah.
it just it
The
becomes
ripple
it becomes
effect.
very
Yeah,
much that. Yeah, that's right, the ripple effect.
yeah, yeah. And right now, apart from Tre'dish, I think you're also running A-list ventures. Am I correct?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Could you tell
Um,
me a bit more about it?
yeah, A-list basically is it's a venture advisory studio in which we're basically providing advisory frameworks for, again, similar to what I talked about, which is basically that framework around we work with companies that are like past POC, pre-Series A, but at a point they're at an inflection point where building a framework to get to that point where they can really get to a good product market fit and then scale the company. That's when we kind of look at companies where we either we advise for first and we invest in. And right now we have like four different portfolio companies that we're working with. Tre'dish is obviously our largest kind of thesis. We kind of built that into the portfolio as well. So A-list is the largest investor for Tre'dish. It's an investor in four other companies. I'm looking at this in terms of extending out, the network of companies that we want to help advise for and potentially work with. And I think the biggest premise being is like the vast majority of these founders, to your point, they're looking for frameworks and repeatable processes, right? So that's kind of the one thing, Ashish, that we kind of built out in this, where not only it's one thing to provide simply, the how of like these frameworks, but it's the other side as well, which is basically the mentality shift and the founder psyche of like how do you actually kind of build these companies from scratch, knowing that there's so much. It's really busy. Entrepreneurship is hard and things are really busy out there, right? So if you can partner up with someone that can give you kind of the psychological kind of framework to actually start a company, build a company, and scale a company, combining with the processes, the how processes, that's what we've done, and yeah, like I said, we're pretty excited about this because we're working with some pretty good companies right now, and we're looking to grow more. And my partner is kind of building a Substack community with me right now, in which it's called the Unstuck Entrepreneur, and we're starting to really kind of talk with a number of different founders that are on that inflection point where they're either thinking of ideas or they're even at that stage where they might be stuck because they might have hit proof of concept, but they're trying to figure out how to get to that next level. So yeah, we're starting to build a community in a framework around how we actually help those entrepreneurs as well.
Great. And do you invest and advise these companies in just Canada and US, or are you also looking at some other geographies?
Our companies are Canada and US right now, but we will be looking at the geographies.
Okay, okay, great.
Yeah.
Uh, and as we move towards the end of this, you know, at the initial stage, you had told me that your seeing your parents work in this trap, your goal was to get them out of this trap. So my question is, are they out of the trap today, and how are you feeling about it?
Yeah. They're well out of the trap, yeah. It's a funny story. So after I sold my fourth um startup, global faces, I end up buying a house in Florida, in Naples, Florida, and I was still pretty young at the time, but it was mainly for them. I wanted them to kind of snowbird there and take some time off. So they did that for 3 years. Before COVID, they did that for like 2.5 years, in which they went there. And yeah, they're older now, but they don't have to worry about anything. Between myself, my two sisters, we're all very independent. We've all done very well for ourselves. So I think it's like, yeah, I mentioned to you earlier, which is the sacrifice that they made. I think their version of like what now they're realizing this, even though they came here for a better life, to create a better life, maybe like not only for the family, but for themselves. If they don't feel like they created a better life for themselves because they worked so hard and struggled so much, I think it's come full circle when they see what they have now. Like, they have an opportunity to obviously live their life. They see their kids being very successful. They see their grandkids all, not ever having to worry about money. So yeah, I definitely think it's all been worth it. And if you ask them, they'd say the same thing.
Great, great. Okay, Peter, any parting note you would like to give to, potential founders who are looking to start their ideas or something?
No, I think, like I said, I think this is a very, if I'm being honest, it's a very difficult time. It's a very difficult economy. It's a very difficult fundraising environment. Like the world is just a very turbulent place right now, as we all know, right? So I think the goal for every founder has to be, thinking outside the box and thinking what you can do more with less. And, a lot of that comes with like AI tools. A lot of that comes with what we talked about earlier, which is basically, the friction point of like you developing a software or an app, but didn't it was the friction was so high. You had to get like five different technical co-founders or individuals they had
Yeah.
to pay high salaries for. That doesn't exist anymore, right? So the biggest thing you can do is basically solve a problem and do so in a smaller scale because you have the tools to do so. And if you do that, then you get to a proof point quicker. So when you talk to individual investors, you have a lot more to prove out, and it's not something's not simply a concept, right? So that's the one piece of advice is like just think outside the box relative to doing not outside the box, it's inside the box now. Do as much as you can with as little tools as possible because they're all accessible right now. You can do a lot more. Like even the last 2 years, it's fundamentally different, and the fundraising landscape has changed because the expectation is that you should be doing a lot more with a lot less.
Wow. So yeah, uniqueness is a key because the initial execution, the MVPs and stuff has become a lot easier, a lot low cost. So yeah,
That's right.
yeah. Thanks a lot, Peter. It was a pleasure doing this with you.
My pleasure, Ashish. Okay, all the best.
Yeah,
Take
thank
care.
you.
Bye now.
Peter said something near the end that I keep coming back to. He said, stay in the game long enough and everything becomes incremental. That is not motivation. That is structural observation. Every failed startup becomes a building block. Every exit sharpens the framework. And this person who started moonlighting at Extreme Pita at the age of 22 while he was working in a bank that his father wanted him to, he has now become a person who has raised $170 million and has sold a company for $350 million. His parents worked every single day so their children wouldn't have to. His kids have never had to worry about money. The sacrifice script a generation exactly as designed. If that kind of journey resonates with you, I will be writing a deeper annotation of this conversation in Founder's Psyche. Link is in the description. And if you know a founder whose inner journey deserves this kind of conversation, please send them my way. I am Ashish, and this is the Founder's Stack. See you next time.